I had always believed my home was my sanctuary, but one night, as I lay in bed, a quiet sound broke the silence, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. When I ventured out to investigate, I was met with the terrifying realization that something or someone had invaded my space, and nothing would ever feel safe again. The night my home was invaded, I had always taken pride in my little home. It wasn't the biggest house on the block, nor the most modern, but it was mine. I had chosen every piece of furniture with care, every curtain and frame. To me, it wasn't just a building, it was a safe haven. That night started like any other. I came home from work exhausted, ready to sink into the old couch and watch a show. As I approached the door, a strange feeling settled in my chest. Something felt off. At first, I thought it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. The porch light flickered, an old bulb that needed replacing, and the latch on the door seemed loose. I brushed it off. Locks were out. I told myself, maybe I had left it like that in the rush of the morning. I stepped inside, but something was wrong. My heart dropped when I saw the state of my living room. The cushions from the couch were scattered on the floor, and the coffee table had been shoved to the side. The framed picture of my parents that always sat on the mantel was gone. I froze. My first instinct was to check every corner of the house, but fear kept my feet rooted to the floor. What if someone was still here? My mind raced as I backed out of the door and grabbed my phone. The police came quickly. They moved through the house with practiced efficiency, but their presence didn't make me feel safer. They found no one and told me there were no signs of forced entry apart from the tampered lock. They said the person might have been after cash or electronics. I nodded, but I couldn't stop thinking about the missing photo. I didn't sleep that first night. Every creak of the floorboards felt amplified in the silence. I kept the lights on and clutched my phone tightly, dialing 911 in my head at the slightest noise. Over the next few days, I tried to return to normal. I replaced the lock and even installed a small security camera by the front door. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. Odd things kept happening. My keys, which I was sure I had left on the hook, turned up on the kitchen counter. A pair of shoes I never wore ended up in the hallway. My friend said it was probably stress. I wasn't convinced. One evening, after a particularly long day, I returned home and checked the footage from the security camera. There was movement. A shadow crossed the hallway inside my house at 2:17 a.m. the night before. I couldn't believe my eyes. I played it again and again. The shadow moved slowly, deliberately, as if the person knew exactly where they were going. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch with a baseball bat in hand, staring at the front door. Around midnight, I heard it. The faint sound of a door creaking. My breathing stopped. I stood up, gripping the bat tightly, and moved towards a hallway. The sound was louder now. Footsteps, deliberate and heavy. As I turned the corner, I saw a figure, a man dressed in dark clothing. For a moment, we both froze. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he turned and ran. I chased him as far as the front yard, but he was too fast. My knees gave out, and I sat on the grass, shaking. When I finally went back inside, I noticed something on the table, a small, dusty photograph of my house from decades ago. On the back, someone had scrawled a single word, mine. The next day, I showed the photograph to the police, but they had no answers. Their theory was that the intruder might have had some connection to the house's history. I began to dig through old records and found something unsettling. My house had once belonged to a man who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The photograph I discovered was from that time. The man in the picture looked eerily similar to the shadow I had seen on the camera. I decided I couldn't stay in the house much longer. The memories of what happened, the constant fear of another break-in, it was too much. I packed up and moved, though part of me felt like I was abandoning a piece of myself. Even now, in a new home, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear footsteps. My locks are always double-checked, and the lights stay on longer than they should. The memory of that night hasn't left me. It taught me how fragile safety is and how quickly it can be taken away. My home was invaded, and though I reclaimed my space, I can never forget the feeling of being watched, of being powerless. Months after moving, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was another photograph of my old house, this time with the current date written on the back. I don't know who sent it or why, but I do know this: some doors, once opened, never really close. Story 2. The elderly stranger in the park. After a long and chaotic day, the park had always been my refuge. It was my escape, a place to breathe and unwind. The park was one of the few places that offered a sense of peace in a world full of noise. Its tall trees stretched over winding paths, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The sound of children's laughter, distant but joyful, mixed with the rustling of leaves and the soft evening breeze. I had made it a habit to take my walks around the same time every evening. The route had become familiar. The old oak tree near the entrance, the small pond where ducks swam lazily, and the bench by the rose garden where I liked to sit for a few moments, taking in the sunset. It was a routine I looked forward to, one that offered me comfort and solitude. But one evening, as I rounded the bend near the entrance, I saw something I hadn't noticed before: a man sitting on the bench by the rose garden. He was elderly, with a pale face lined with deep wrinkles and a head full of graying hair. He wore a dark coat and a hat that obscured most of his features. He seemed harmless enough, but something about his stillness caught my attention. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, people come to parks for all sorts of reasons, and it wasn't uncommon to see elderly people enjoying the quiet. I passed him without a second thought, but as I walked further into the park, I couldn't help but feel an odd sense of awareness. Over the next few days, I found myself noticing the man more and more. He was always in the same spot, sitting quietly on that bench. He never seemed to do much else. No books, no phone, no interaction with anyone. Just sitting, observing. It wasn't until the fourth day that I began to feel uneasy. I was walking my usual route, taking the same path I always did. But this time, as I passed the bench, I caught his gaze. His eyes were locked on me, piercing through the air between us. He didn't move his head, didn't even blink. His stare was intense, deliberate. It was as if he was waiting for something. I shrugged off the discomfort, telling myself I was being paranoid. People looked at others all the time, especially in a public place like a park. Still, the next day, when I passed by again, I noticed that he was sitting in the same place, watching. This time, the feeling was stronger, like a weight on my chest. Was he staring at me? Or was it just my imagination running wild? I tried not to make eye contact, but I couldn't stop myself from glancing in his direction. There was something unsettling about how he never seemed to break his focus. It wasn't just that he was there every day, at the same time. It was his stillness, his silence. No one else seemed to notice him. The children played nearby. The joggers sped past, and yet he stayed unmoving. By the time a week had passed, I couldn't ignore the man any longer. I had started altering my routine, walking in a different direction, leaving earlier than usual just to avoid passing that bench. But it didn't matter. He was always there, waiting. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, I decided I would confront him. I couldn't keep walking around this growing sense of discomfort. I approached him slowly, my heartbeat picking up. My mind raced with possibilities. What if he was dangerous? What if I was just overreacting? But I couldn't keep wondering. I had to know. "Excuse me," I said, my voice more nervous than I intended. "I've noticed you here a lot. Are you waiting for someone?" The old man looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray, like storm clouds just before a downpour. He didn't speak for a moment, as if he were weighing my question. Finally, he spoke in a voice that was soft, but somehow chilling. I enjoy watching people, he said, his lips curling into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. I was taken aback by the simplicity of his answer. Watching people, was that all? His voice was calm, but there was an underlying eeriness to it, like there was something more he wasn't saying. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Why me? I found myself asking, before I could stop myself. His smile widened just a fraction, and he said nothing more. The silence between us grew thick and uncomfortable. I wanted to turn and walk away, but something held me in place. I'll be here tomorrow, he said, almost as if he were making a promise. The next few days felt heavier. His words echoed in my mind. I enjoy watching people. What did that mean? Was I the only one he watched, or was this just a strange habit of his? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One evening, I arrived at the park later than usual, hoping to miss him, but there he was, sitting on the same bench. The same stillness, the same piercing stare. I tried to keep my distance, walking along the other side of the park, hoping he wouldn't notice me. But when I glanced back, there he was again, his gaze locked on me. I quickened my pace, but he was always there, always watching. Then it happened. I walked past the park one morning, and there he was, standing near the entrance, as though waiting for me. I froze. How could he have known I was coming this way? The park wasn't exactly on my daily commute, and I hadn't planned to walk through it. I turned quickly and walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I glanced over my shoulder, I saw him following at a distance. At this point, I knew something had to be done. I couldn't keep ignoring it, hoping it would stop. The following evening, I went to the local police station. I explained everything. The strange man in the park, his constant presence, and the unnerving feeling I had whenever I was near him. The officer was kind but matter-of-fact. There's not much we can do unless he's actively harassing you or threatening you. If he does, please come back and let us know. It wasn't the reassurance I had hoped for, but it was something. I decided to change my routine to be cautious. I stopped going to the park for a few days, taking different routes home. For a while, it seemed to work. The man was gone. I breathed a little easier, telling myself it was over. One evening, a few weeks later, I found myself walking near the park again. I had become so used to avoiding it that I hadn't even thought about the man for days. But that night, as I turned a corner, I spotted him again. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a young woman, someone I had never seen before. But there was something about her that caught my attention. The way she looked at the man, the familiarity in her eyes. It took a moment before I realized why she looked so familiar. She looked like me. I froze. It couldn't be. But there she was, a younger version of myself. Was this some kind of twisted game?
Before I could approach them, the elderly man turned and began walking away, his head held high, as if he were done with the encounter. I watched as he disappeared into the crowd. The woman stood there for a moment longer, clearly confused. I wanted to speak to her, to ask if she knew the man, but the words caught in my throat. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that woman, of the man's strange connection to her, haunted me. I never saw him again after that evening, but I couldn't help but feel that he had been watching me, waiting for something. The experience had changed me. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. The park, once a place of solace, now felt like a battleground for my peace of mind. I couldn't walk there without feeling his presence lingering, even though he was gone. Who was he? What did he want from me? I'll never know. But one thing is for sure, that quiet park will never feel the same again.
Story 3. Footsteps in the darkness of my new house. Moving to a new house was supposed to be an exciting chapter in my life. A fresh start after years of living in a cramped apartment. The house was quaint, nestled in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. I had spent months looking for the perfect place, and when I finally found it, everything seemed to fall into place. The first night I spent there was peaceful. The The walls were bare, the air still fresh with the scent of new paint and wood. The floors creaked underfoot, but it didn't bother me. It was just the sound of an old house settling. I told myself. I had heard about this in every horror story. The creaks and groans of an unfamiliar home. But I was used to it. After all, this was going to be my sanctuary, my escape. The next few days were spent unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and trying to make the house feel like home. As the days passed, I grew more comfortable in the space, confident that this house would be the place where I could truly find peace. But little did I know that my idea of peace would soon be shattered. The house was eerily quiet that first night after everything had been arranged. It was a silence that felt too deep, almost unnatural. The kind of silence where you begin to hear things that you might otherwise ignore. I lay in bed, trying to sleep, but my mind kept racing. I kept hearing the soft sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was my imagination. The house was old, after all, and old houses always make strange noises at night. Maybe it was the sound of the floors settling, or the wind making the walls creak. I told myself it was nothing, just the natural sounds of an unfamiliar house. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were faint, but they were there, soft but deliberate. The rhythmic sound of someone walking, but with no one in sight. I sat up in bed, listening, heart pounding. The footsteps echoed down the hallway outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, waiting for them to stop, but they didn't. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my fingers trembling. My heart thudded loudly in my chest as I slowly got out of bed and walked toward the hallway. The footsteps continued, just out of view. I walked cautiously, my eyes scanning the darkened hallway, but there was no one. The house was empty, yet the footsteps lingered in the silence, just out of reach, almost taunting me. The next few nights were no better. The footsteps had become more frequent, more pronounced. They no longer came in sporadic intervals, but in a steady, unbroken rhythm, as if someone or something was walking just beyond my reach. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of what might be causing the sounds. I checked the house during the day, searching for any logical explanation. Was there something I had missed during the move? Some strange creak in the floorboards, a draft that made the walls groan? But everything seemed normal. The house was as I had left it, empty but for me. The footsteps continued at night, never faltering, never pausing. Sometimes they seemed to grow louder, as if someone was walking closer to my room. Other times they felt distant, fading away down the hall. But every night they came, relentless, undeterred. It wasn't just the footsteps. At times, I would hear a faint whisper, like someone calling my name from the other side of the house. I would freeze, waiting for the sound to come again, but it never did. Only silence followed, as if whatever was had never been there. My sleep became fitful. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart racing, convinced I had heard something or someone moving in the dark. But when I checked the house, I found nothing. I began to research the house's history, hoping to find some logical explanation for the strange occurrences. The house had been built in the early 1900s, and there had been several owners before me. I spoke to the neighbors, asking if they had ever experienced anything unusual. Most of them didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary, but one older woman gave me a curious look. "You're in the old Harrison house, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unsure of what to expect. She hesitated before continuing. "It's funny," she said. "I remember the family who lived there before you. They were lovely people, but after they left, things started to happen. People said they heard footsteps, whispers, strange noises in the night, but no one ever really talked about it." Her words sent a chill through me. It wasn't just me. Others had experienced the same thing. But what did it mean? Was the house haunted? Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? I couldn't take it anymore. The relentless footsteps, the whispers, the sense of being watched. It was driving me to the edge. I stopped sleeping, spending my nights pacing the halls, trying to catch whatever it was that lurked in the shadows. But every time I thought I was close to uncovering the source, it would slip away, like smoke dissipating in the air. One night, I decided to confront whatever was head-on. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, I ventured into the house, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. The footsteps began the moment I stepped into the hallway. They echoed closer this time, as if the source was waiting for me to catch up. I followed the sound down the hall, my steps steady despite the fear that clung to me like a heavy fog. The footsteps led me to the basement door. I stood at the top of the stairs, my flashlight illuminating the dark, damp space below. The footsteps stopped. I hesitated, the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. This was it. I had to face whatever was in the darkness. I took a deep breath and descended into the basement, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The moment I reached the bottom of the stairs, the footsteps started again. This time, they were all around me. But when I swung my flashlight in every direction, there was no one, just shadows, just empty space. Then, as if something invisible had triggered it, the house seemed to groan around me. The air grew thick, oppressive. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and a deep, unsettling silence filled the basement. I stood there, unable to move, unsure of what I was experiencing. It was as if the house itself had become aware of me, a silent observer waiting for me to leave. I never found out what caused the footsteps in the darkness. I never discovered who or what was walking through the halls of my new home. But over time, the sounds began to fade. I still hear them sometimes, but now I know better than to look for an explanation. The house remains my home, but it is no longer a place of peace. It is a place of uncertainty, where the unknown lingers in the shadows. The footsteps are no longer an intrusion, but a reminder that some things are better left undisturbed. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and I'm lying in bed, I swear I can still hear them, faint, distant footsteps, always just beyond reach.